All right. Here's the thing. You've seen The Matrix, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
no idea where this is
There's a
going.
scene in The Matrix. There's a scene in The Matrix where Neo is kind of meeting Tank for the first time. Tank is about to take him through some training programs. And it has become clear that there is some sort of like mythology or prophecy around Neo. And Neo is kind of like vaguely becoming aware of this. And Tank, as he's getting ready to set him down, he's like, "So you've heard what they think about you?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Man, if it's true, whew, I don't know, but it's a very exciting time. Let's get to work." And that line, like that, it's a very exciting time. Like I love it so much, and I've been kind of thinking about that as the title for our podcast
Yeah. Wait,
because
so
the
wait, what was the title you were thinking?
it's a very exciting time.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I don't know, it might not work, but I've been landing it because that's how I feel about it, right? So I told you this story earlier, when I talked to Annie and told her like, hey, I'm going to record a podcast with Chuck about UFOs. She's like, really? Like, you want to be the UFO guy? And I was like, well, and my instinct is to be like, no, it's different. And then I thought about it for a second, like, yeah,
Yeah,
actually, I
yeah, I
do because
do.
that is the whole point of the podcast, and I don't
Yeah,
think that's clear to a lot of
yeah,
people. It's a very exciting time.
yeah,
There's stuff happening. Like we grew up in an era, post Blue Book, post the government,
yeah,
calling everything swamp gas. Every time the news reported on UFOs, the X-Files theme would be played over it, and the
yeah,
anchors
yeah,
are
yeah.
giggling. Like nobody takes it seriously,
No,
and that is pervasive in our culture. But the thing is, in the last 5 years, this has really changed. And I don't think a lot of people really understand how much it has changed. This
yeah,
isn't really like the giggle factor isn't
yeah,
there anymore. And you see Congress and DOD and people like that talking about this, and they're not up there like, oh no, like there was a president, I forget which presidential candidate it was. I think it might have been Buchanan, who was known to be a UFO guy. And they
huh,
brought it up during the debates, and it basically lost him the presidency. Like
sure.
he lost everyone's respect. Um, like that's not where we're at anymore. Like Marco Rubio is one of the big cheerleaders about this.
Yeah,
Rubio's absolutely still gunning to be president. Now, I don't like the guy personally, but he is
yeah,
dogged about this topic. He doesn't think this is precluding him from being president, and he's not alone. This is a not multidisciplinary. What's the word when it's both branches of Congress?
multi-sensory, right? No, bipartisan.
Multi-sensory, yeah. Bipartisan, thank you. It's a bipartisan thing. Like Senator
Sure.
Gillibrand is in on it too. Um,
I'm not sure
we
that you're
find
right,
out,
though. I'm not sure that it
yeah,
is actually ungiggle worthy yet. But I think maybe
that's
people
fair.
like us
Yeah,
could be working on that. Because right now I'm very giggle prone to the whole thing.
sure, sure.
I'll admit that's partly my like background, uh, but yeah,
Well, you know what? That is a great segue. So why don't we talk about this for a second? So let's introduce
okay,
ourselves.
yeah,
So if for those of you who don't know me, who I expect is nobody, because I don't think anybody will hear this podcast other than our immediate friends and family for a while. I'm Scott. I have been interested in UFOs and paranormal stuff my whole life, but I got seriously into it back in 2017, and I will be talking about that later in the podcast. But this is a topic that I am increasingly taking seriously, and I have been spending almost all of my spare time, like delving into this. All of the podcasts that I listen
yeah,
to right now are UFO stuff.
yeah,
And I realized I was talking to Chuck about this because Chuck and I talk, once a week or so over lunch. And I will tell him when I find a particularly interesting UFO tidbit or something. And Chuck turned to me one week. He was like, "Oh, so what's the latest UFO news? And I was kind of laughing at that, but it occurred to me that there's some value in that, and not just for our theoretical podcast audience, but selfishly for me,
Yeah,
right? Like I am the kind of person who learns by voraciously consuming,
yeah,
but if I don't find a way to channel that into output somehow, I lose it. And
yeah,
I realized as I was trying to summarize some things for Chuck one time, like I had heard one claim over and over and over again, but I had forgotten the origin of it. And
mm,
I had to go back and look it up. So I think there's some value for me in, okay, I'm taking all of this in. Now I want to channel this out into a digestible format.
yeah.
So that brings me to my mostly willing co-host, Chuck. Why don't you introduce yourself? What's your
Yeah.
background? Why are you here?
So I'm Chuck, and as Scott mentioned, we talk a lot about this. And I'm a deep nerd who enjoys listening to other people nerd out about things. I don't really care what they are. I just love people being passionate and excited about things. Scott happens to be excited about UFOs and the paranormal. And I think that's lovely. So, um, but I have to say, my background, I I am the son of a preacher man, and my surrogate father is was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. We're going to talk a lot about the Air Force and how they don't believe in UFOs and aliens to this day. And so that was like between the whole like preacher thing and the Air Force thing. Like I've got a lot suggesting that UFOs and aliens aren't a thing. I think if I asked either of those parental figures, they would. Uh, they're both very flexible and open, which is part of why I am as well. So they would have something compelling to say, uh, but yeah. So my bias is kind of honestly disbelieving and giggling, but
That's fair.
but I do like hearing about it, and I love how I am excited, like you were saying, like if this is really happening, like wow, that is actually a big deal, and I'm excited to
Right?
be
Yeah.
talking about it right now. So yeah,
Yeah. Would you describe yourself as a skeptic? That's kind of a loaded word.
yeah. Would I describe myself as skeptic? I think certainly in this case, yeah. Um, uh,
Would you
in general,
describe yourself as the Scully to my Mulder?
I have to admit, I didn't watch X Files like at
Oh,
all.
Chuck, you're killing me. You're gonna join a
I
UFO
mean, it was
podcast and you never watched
so
the
obviously
X-Files?
garbage. Like, I mean, what am I supposed to do?
It wasn't a documentary.
I know. Oh, I don't know.
That's
I
hilarious.
don't even know what I was watching instead at the time. I was probably just playing video games the whole time. We didn't have
No,
Twitch
no,
back
I,
then, so
I, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Annie has been joking about this. There is a movie that our family likes called The Mitchells and the Machines, and
mm,
there is a little boy in that movie who is autistic, and he really loves dinosaurs. And there's a scene in the
sure.
movie where he's sitting in his room with the phone book, and he goes down and finds a number, and he dials it, and he goes, "Hi, would you like to talk to me about dinosaurs?" No? Okay. Then he hangs up, then he goes to the next number. Hi, would you like to talk to me about? So I think Annie is of the opinion like, oh, it's nice that you found someone who'll let you talk to them about UFOs.
Oh my God. It, how
Yeah.
many people did you have to call before you hit on me?
Well, I called you right away because we were
Okay.
already talking. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely before you and I talked about UFOs during lunch every now and then, like I would talk to Annie about this stuff. And I don't think she would consider herself a skeptic, but it's definitely not her field of interest. Like
Yeah.
she tolerates me because we're married.
Yeah. I get it. Um, I think that if I were going to apply a label, it would probably be Gnostic. Um, and uh,
Was that agnostic or Gnostic?
without the A, um,
Okay.
I think. I actually don't know anything about the Gnostics, so I could be signing myself up for
So
something crazy, but um,
As I understand it, agnostic means I don't have enough information to judge. I'm remaining open-minded.
okay.
Gnostic is like a school of mysticism. I think gnosis means knowledge. So it's kind of like
Oh, okay.
about secret knowledge. I might be wrong about
Okay.
that. I also don't know much about the Gnostics.
Then maybe I'm an agnostic. Um, Clearly, I don't have enough information about
Got it.
that.
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah,
But
you
yeah,
know,
okay.
that's why I like the it's a really exciting time thing, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing he says right before that is, if it's true, whew, like Tank himself in that scene is not saying, Neo, you're the chosen one, and I'm going to train you. He's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if you are, holy cow. And that's where I think I'm at
Yeah.
with this topic. And you know, like I'm kind of jokingly portraying myself as a huge UFO buff. There's a lot in this field that I kind of roll my eyes at. And the thing that I'm gonna try to do for you in the field, it's kind of divided between what they internally refer to in the field of ufology, a word that makes Chuck giggle every time. In the field of ufology, there's basically people who are nuts and bolts people,
Hmm.
meaning I don't want to talk about little green men and abductions and cattle mutilations and crop circles. I want to talk about the vehicles that are flying around in our sky that we can track on radar. I'm not going to
Okay.
speculate about what's inside them. I'm going to talk about what we can observe, you know, just the
Yeah.
facts, man. Um, and then there's what that side kind of dismissively refers to as the woo side, which is a word that I always laugh about because my mom worked in a new age shop for many
Yeah.
years, and she often referred to it as working at the woo woo store.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, any of that kind of like spiritual, consciousness driven stuff tends to get kind of dismissed. Um, so I want to be clear, like I think UFOs are real. I hope I'll be able to convince you of that. I I start rolling my eyes a bit when you get to the books that are like a list of all of the races visiting the Earth. And it's like, oh, there's the Greys from Zeta Reticuli 3, and they do this. And then
Hmm.
there's the reptilians. And now you have to understand the reptilians are evil and they're out to enslave the and like, where are you getting all this, man? Like
Yeah. Right.
that. So I want to be clear, like, you know, what am I saying here? Like, I'm a UFO guy, but I'm not a crazy UFO
Yeah.
guy.
Because that's always how it starts, right?
Right, right. But I do think like that's why I like that quote from Tank, right? The if
Hmm.
it's true, whew, it's a very exciting time. So the reason I'm so excited, and this kind of brings us back to why we're talking about this now, and why I've gotten so back into this topic
Yeah.
in the last 5 years, is I don't think most people realize that there has been some major developments in the field of ufology in the last 5 years. So a real brief recap here is
Okay.
in order. So in 2017, the New York Times published an article about the Pentagon's secret UFO program. This article came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like you're giggling. Right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Every time someone talks about the Pentagon and a secret anything, I flash to West Wing and the president's secret plan for inflation. Um, did you
What's
watch
that?
that show?
I watched it, but I don't remember what you're
Oh,
describing.
okay. They had a new press secretary or someone was filling in, and they told the press that the president has a plan, and the press was like, "Why hasn't the president announced it?" They're like, "Well, it's a secret plan." Like he has a secret plan. It's just like freaking snowballed after that. Anyway, so now
Totally, totally.
they have a secret program.
Sure. Now, here's the thing. So my dad worked for the government. Specifically, he worked for the Oregon department of the DEQ called DEQ, which is like the Oregon branch of the EPA.
Okay,
So he wasn't like military or anything, but my dad has often scoffed at the idea that the US government and the military in particular could keep
right.
anything a secret.
Could even
Like he's
have a
like,
secret
as someone
program. Yeah,
exactly. He's like, as someone who works for the government, I can assure you nothing is kept secret. But that said, we're not talking about the government. We're talking about the military. And the military is a little different, right? Top secret
Yep.
classification is a thing. Compartmentalized programs are absolutely a thing.
Yeah.
They literally just announced this week the successor to the B 2 stealth bomber, which
Hmm.
nobody had heard of, and they've been developing it in secret. The
Huh.
B 2 bomber in its time, the F-117 Falcon, all of these
Yeah.
were secret stealth projects developed in the black.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, the Manhattan Project, famously. So what I will say is, while I agree that on the whole the government is not great at keeping secrets, they are certainly capable of it in circumstances.
Sure. Yeah.
And as we delve into this stuff, what we find we are talking about is not everyone in the military knows about this. It is
Yeah.
a compartmental thing inside a compartmental thing inside a compartmental thing. There are multiple layers of
Makes sense.
obfuscation here,
Hmm.
and a small number of people who believe it. And there's a lot of people who believe this has actually been moved out of the government entirely into private industry,
Oof.
specifically to avoid things like military people who are obligated to report to Congress
Yeah.
reporting to
Right. Yeah.
Congress.
Yeah.
Now we're verging on conspiracy territory there. I'm not going to get into it too much, but all I wanted to do is make the point like I find it totally believable that there are secretive programs.
Sure. Yeah.
And in this case, the New York Times reported on it. Now, the thing to know about the New York Times is they are not a rumor mill paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
The editorial process for the Times is legendarily difficult. You're not allowed to get things in unless you have multiple confirming sources, etc.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, and they had a third author on there whose name I always forget, Helen something. Um, they'd been working on this story for a while and they broke it. In a nutshell, what happened is it comes out that Senator Harry Reid, who was at the time the head of the defense, I'm talking out my ass, I don't remember, one of the
Okay.
congressional committees that's responsible for stuff, he was in charge of it. So he and two other senators had committed a bunch of funding. I think it was like $200 million
Shit.
to this secret program to investigate UFOs and paranormal stuff. Some of
Hmm.
this stuff has come out later. Some of it was reported in
So
the New
this
York
is
Times article, but
prior to 2017, right?
yeah, so it leaked
Okay.
in 2017.
Okay. Got it.
But in, I think it was 2004, 2005, they
Okay.
started the program. And the contract for this went to, excuse me, went to Bigelow Aerospace, which is
Of course.
an aerospace firm in Las Vegas run by a real estate guy, Robert Bigelow, who is famously into UFOs. The
Interesting.
Bigelow Aerospace building has an alien head for a logo on the side of it. Um,
Hmm.
they did a whole bunch of stuff,
Yeah.
including investigating out at a ranch in Utah that's kind of like a paranormal center called
Interesting.
Skinwalker Ranch. They did a bunch of UFO tracking. They worked with MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, which is kind of like the
Hmm.
civilian UFO research group.
Okay.
They compiled all
Interesting.
this research and they were required to make a bunch of reports to Congress, and they did. And their funding ran out in 2012. So from that point forward, Bigelow wasn't involved. Yeah, what's up?
One other thing that actually I find really compelling about Bigelow is that they they actually have some like space credentials. Like they have a
Oh yeah.
habitation module on the space station. Like
Mhm.
they,
Yeah.
I feel like uh, if you can get to space, you actually understand the complications of being there. And I'm much more inclined to believe someone who has that kind of credential um,
Mhm.
than I don't know random people on Reddit
Yeah,
or
totally.
yeah I don't know
Yeah.
yeah
Now,
cool
most of the reports they produced are still classified, so people haven't
sure
read them. And they're kind of all over the map. Like we have some of the titles. Some of them are on ESP, some of them are on paranormal phenomena on the ranch, some of them are on UFOs. Anyway, in 2012, the funding ran out and the program pivoted. It was supposed to just end. There's no more funding from Congress. but
Sure.
the DoD kept it going, apparently in a much slimmed down fashion. The name of the program changed to ATIP, which is Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So
Okay.
AATIP. ATIP was headed by a guy named Lou Elizondo, who we are going to be talking a lot about, not just
Okay.
today, but ongoing. He is,
Yeah, I recognize that name.
for the last 3 to 4 years, he's been kind of like the central figure in
Yeah.
UFO goings on. Um,
Okay.
the reason we're talking about Lou Elizondo and ATIP at all, because it was an actual black program, is in 2017, Lou Elizondo resigned from the DoD in frustration that he could not get his bosses to take this topic seriously.
Hmm.
So what ATIP did was they were focused exclusively on UFOs and
Hmm.
exclusively on military verifiable witnesses. So
Okay.
they were investigating cases where you had multiple witnesses, where you had radar tracks, where you had, multiple forms of evidence, cockpit recordings,
Yeah.
infrared recordings, all of this stuff. They ended up compiling a list of extraordinary features that I don't think they ever put it this way, but basically how you can tell a UFO versus just
Hmm.
something we don't know what it is. Um,
Okay.
and what they boil down to is um, extreme high velocities. And we're not talking like jet plane fast. We're talking like many times faster than anything we've ever made can travel.
Okay.
Instantaneous maneuverability. It was really common to see these devices going 10,000 miles an hour and make a 90-degree turn.
Huh.
That's just not
Bonkers.
possible based on our understanding of aeronautics, right?
Yeah. Right.
They have no visible propulsion mechanism or control surfaces. So
Okay.
again, how do you fly with no thrust, with no sound, with no flaps to control what
Right.
direction you're going in? They're transmedia. Now, this not only means coming from space to the atmosphere, like you
Okay.
might expect if we're talking about UFOs, but also between air and water. It was really
Hmm.
common to observe these plunging into the ocean or coming out of the ocean.
Did they
And
splash?
in some cases, there was a splash, in some cases, there's not. But the main thing is the
Huh.
speeds they're traveling. If one of our jets, even if you could
Oh yeah.
imagine making a jet that was capable of going underwater, if you hit the water at a certain velocity, it's
Yeah.
like slamming into a brick wall.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these things would just slice into the water. So anyway, they called these the five observables. And and invisibility. So they can be
It's convenient.
hard to observe. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um, so Elizondo, when he came out, was very clear he's not a woo-woo guy. He is a nuts and
Yeah.
bolts guy.
Okay.
And his whole take on it when he came out is, I don't know what these things are. I'm not out here telling you they're little green men. I'm saying there are unknown objects in our airspace harassing our pilots and our military,
Hmm.
and we have no ability to interact with, control, keep up with, or defend ourselves from them,
Yeah.
and
That is
nobody's
concerning.
taking it seriously.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
his whole point. It's not, hey, why aren't we talking about the aliens? It's, shouldn't the Navy, shouldn't the Air Force be investigating this? Shouldn't we be paying
Shouldn't be
attention? Like,
worried. Like, or at
it's
least,
like,
yeah, paying attention to it at the very least.
yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head with the worried there. So Elizondo is a bit of a controversial figure.
Sure.
I think he's great. A lot of people in the UFO field are concerned because he's former military, and
Yeah.
specifically because his past is in disinformation. There's concern that he's a
Oh.
plant and he's out here to fuck
Okay.
everyone up. But here's the thing. Elizondo has been very clear. He has never come out. Sorry,
Yeah.
to be clear, the concern is that this is a transparent ploy to get the military more funding. There's a threat.
Sure.
We need money.
Right. Sure. Why not?
Elizondo has been very clear. He has used the word threat, but he's like, I think y'all are misunderstanding what I mean by that. Is
Yeah.
that, for example, if you wander onto a military airbase and walk out onto the runway and you get hit with the backsplash from a jet as it's taking off, That is a threat.
Yeah.
You are under threat by walking out. That's not hostility. The jet isn't
Right. Yeah.
hostile to you. So you need to distinguish between something being a threat and something being hostile. We have no evidence these things are hostile. They've never attacked. They've never
Okay.
done
Uh,
anything malicious. They have absolutely interfered. They
right.
have gotten in our pilot's way. There have been near misses. There have been all sorts of weird encounters, but there's never been
Interesting.
any evidence of a hostility. But by definition, we don't know what
Yeah.
they are. We don't know how to defend ourselves from them. They are a threat, and we should be studying them. So he
Right.
ultimately resigned from the DoD because he couldn't get his bosses to take it seriously. He's writing these reports, he's showing them all this
Yeah.
evidence of these encounters, and they won't take it up to the admirals. So he's like, all
Right.
right, I'm going to go public.
Yeah. Oh, I bet they like that.
Yeah, they did not.
Yeah, they do not. So so like, and we don't know how they're propelled or like what their energy source is or anything like that. So it feels very much like the backsplash thing. Like
Yeah,
I don't think that airplane is hostile towards me, but it can still be a very real threat. Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Has
yeah.
like have people gotten sick or have there been any like accidental problems?
That is a really interesting question, Chuck.
Okay.
We'll circle back to that in a
Okay.
little bit.
All right. All right.
Um,
Oh yeah, we
but
haven't
yeah,
finished our
you
original
kind of hit the
topic.
nail on the head, right? Like Elizondo mentions these things are a threat, and he's
Mhm.
not saying that out of nowhere. So he quits the military
Yeah, yeah.
and he goes to the New York Times, and he is a really interesting guy because he's always dancing right up to the edge of violating his security oath.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? So he's telling you, like, yes, I worked for this secret program, but he won't tell you what they discovered. He'll tell
Sure.
you what they studied. He'll tell you the characteristics of what they studied, but he's not like leaking radar information or anything like that.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting, the article that came out in 2017 was paired with the release of three videos, which have since become famous. These are all uh, what's the word, like infrared cameras mounted on Navy planes. There's the gimbal video, there's the go fast video, and there's the FLIR video. And all three of them are videos of anomalous objects in the sky that the pilots are recording. And you can hear the
Okay.
pilots talking about it, and they're excited. They're like,
Huh.
oh, got it. He's like, oh, you got it on camera? Yeah, I got it on camera. Like, what the hell is
Oh,
that
that's
thing? Oh,
different.
look, it's rotating, right? Like, you can hear
Yeah.
them talking, and they're excited about it.
Yeah.
So the original article is really focused on the ATIP program and Lou Elizondo leaving it, and hey, secret UFO program in the government. The government has been telling us for 50 years UFOs are nonsense; they don't exist. In 2011, the White House published a statement in response to a petition saying there is zero evidence of
Hmm.
unknown objects flying in our sky. Like the party line across the board was
Yeah.
there's nothing to see here, move on. And all of a sudden, like, well, there was 200 million worth of investigation and an ongoing black program to study it. But
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
bit of a
Interesting.
shift, right? Uh, the videos, the stories from them end up coming out over time. In 2018, there was a series of articles that came out talking about these specific military encounters, and they're fascinating. I want to talk about them in more detail later, but I want to tell you
Yeah.
about one particular incident because there are multiple Navy witnesses who have since come out and talked about it. And mostly this is from a 2004 incident called the Nimitz encounters. This is on the aircraft carrier the Nimitz. It's part of a carrier
Okay.
group. They've recorded an incident with multiple radar tracks, multiple witnesses. They scrambled
Hmm.
jets to go check this out. Um, this pilot, David Fravor, was going out with his flight group on training maneuvers, and they got diverted to an actual incident. And they didn't really tell him anything about it. They were just like, go to this location. They go
Okay.
there, and he describes seeing the water churned up as if he described it
Oh.
as looking like a 747 was sinking into the water. So he described it
Okay.
as something under the water. And above the water, there is a device that he referred to as the Tic Tac. Tic Tac has kind of
Okay.
become a generic term for these devices, but what he's describing is this kind of ovoid white object,
Hmm.
maybe the size of like a small car. No control surfaces, nothing, and it's zipping around above the water. And it starts
Crazy.
interacting with him. As he banks around to get a look at it, it matches his position in space.
Huh.
So he's doing these weird maneuvers, trying to kind of engage with it, and it is clearly responding to him. There's a
Hmm.
whole lot more to that story, but here's the part that's really going to mess with your mind, Chuck.
Okay. I'm
So
excited.
in jet encounters, they have something called the cap point. I don't know what cap stands for, but basically, this is the rendezvous point. When
Okay.
we break off and we go away, the jets are going to meet up at this point.
Okay.
That point is chosen by the computer randomly and sent directly from the ship's computer to the jet after the mission starts. None of the people involved know what the cap point is before they leave. It's not like they talk about it the week before or there's a cap point for the week. It's like per mission, the
Okay.
computer chooses a cap point. So I can't remember whether the Tic Tac left or if they decided they were going to leave. But long story short, they broke off and they're getting ready to go back to their cap point. And the guy on the ship comes on. He goes, Commander, you're never going to believe this. Uh, it's at your cap point.
Hmm. Like it
How the
left
hell
or
would it? Yeah, it left and it is now waiting for you at your cap point.
wow,
How would
that's
it
weird.
know where that is? Now,
Yeah.
this raises all sorts of questions of there is a
Sure.
signal being sent, maybe it's reading the
Sure.
computer, maybe it's psychic, but one way or another, this is not something that it should have known. And
Hmm.
I think a relevant detail, one of the common explanations people float is this is clearly experimental US technology. I'm getting way into the weeds here. I want to talk more about this encounter later, but
Yeah.
this is one of the things that I think speaks against it being experimental US technology because
Sure.
the pilots themselves don't know what the cap point is. The ship and
Yeah.
the jet know what the cap point is, and you find out when you're going there. So anyway,
Interesting.
there's a lot of stuff there. But point is, that is one of many encounters happening to Navy pilots. Now, there's a whole interesting thing here about why it's only Navy pilots that we're finding out
Sure.
about. The
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of word in the community is the Air Force, having taken a bit of a bullying for all of this stuff back in the 60s, refuses to look at UFO stuff, refuses to publicly engage with it. They
Sure.
are still to this day being very obstinate about not participating in anything. So all of a sudden the Navy, who has their own fighter jets,
Hmm.
are the ones encountering this and coming out. So it's kind of funny that the Navy are the ones talking about UFOs. But so
I
we've
think
got
you
all
hear,
these,
yeah, you hear similar things in the space program about
yeah,
Navy astronauts being, um, I don't know, a little more flexible and willing to engage with like science and other stuff. They're just, it's a different,
yeah.
really different branch, it seems.
Well, and to give the Air Force credit, they really did take a lot of heat in the
Well, I'm
60s. They
sure.
were the public face of the UFO stuff through Blue Book, and it was a big cluster, and people were unhappy with them. I don't
Yeah.
blame them for getting to a point where maybe they've looked at it and they've decided, okay, I don't know what this is, but it doesn't appear to be threatening us,
Yeah.
or I guess it doesn't appear to be hostile. So
Yeah.
we're
There you
going
go.
to actively stop investigating it because this is not looking good for us. I
Yeah.
wouldn't blame them if that was kind of stated policy, even if it's frustrating for me as someone who's interested in this.
Yeah.
So yeah, all the 2018, all these naval encounters start leaking, and I want to be clear. Like the Tic Tac was talking about one device, but many of the other ones are talking about hundreds of objects descending
Hmm.
from the atmosphere to sea level at incredible rates of speed, and they're all being
Wow.
tracked on radar. Many witnesses, all sorts. So many, many encounters. Three videos that came out of it were leaked with that New York Times article. They made a big deal. Those videos were later authenticated by the Navy, meaning they're
Huh.
saying these are genuine naval videos. They are undoctored. There's a chain of custody that comes back to us. These are not fakes. And a little later after that, hilariously, they were declassified. So
I
they were
mean,
leaks in the truest sense, but
yeah.
eventually they were declassified. The Navy was like, all right, they're out.
Well, clearly everyone's already seen it, so we might as well declassify this shit.
Right? Well, they
Yeah.
didn't have to, right? They could have left
I
them
mean, yeah,
classified and done a
yeah,
really hardcore investigation into who leaked them and sent someone to prison, and they did not do that, which is interesting
yeah,
in its own right.
yeah. That is interesting.
Um, yeah, so here's where things really get interesting. Okay, so all of that happens. Now, this could have been a nothing, right? Like, okay, the Navy
Sure.
has a program, but the DoD comes out and they go, yeah, there was a program, but we've since closed it down. We haven't really found anything. It's all swamp gas and weather balloons. Don't worry. They didn't do that. They
Yeah.
didn't make any kind of statement. There was a little bit of back and forth over they tried to kind of discredit Elizondo, and they were later forced to walk that back when Elizondo sued them. But in a nutshell, there was no strong effort by the DoD to deny any of this
Okay.
or to say it was nothing. They were forced to admit the program was real, and that
Hmm.
was kind of it. In the meantime, one thing to be aware of is certain members of Congress, specifically the Gang of Eight and some of the people on the committees about naval stuff, about military stuff, are authorized to ask for briefings from
Sure.
the military on classified matters.
Yeah, yeah. That makes
The
sense.
dirty secret is most of them don't. They kind of
Yeah.
trust the military to do their own thing. I don't need briefings on the stealth bomber that you're developing. I trust that you're doing the right thing, etc.
Sure.
Well, all of a sudden, all these senators are asking for briefings like, hey, what the hell is going on? Is
Yeah,
this
yeah.
a thing? Are you actually tracking them?
I mean, you
Um,
have to know to ask about a thing. I bet they are getting briefings
exactly.
about the stealth bomber because that shit's expensive. But
Well, so some of them were, but for these actual black programs, they don't tell you unless you ask, and a very small group of people are allowed to ask. So Harry
yeah, yeah,
Reid is an interesting case because he would have been one of the people who was in a position to ask. So
yeah.
what led Harry Reid to authorize funding for a secret program? Like something made him decide that was
Something.
worth spending money on. Uh,
Yeah.
so we have a
Interesting.
similar thing happening in late 2018, 2019, where Congress people are asking for briefings that they were not currently getting. And all of a sudden, we have Congress people coming out and saying things about UFOs, which they were not before. Again, we've talked about this
Sure. Yeah.
before. There was a long period of time where this was political suicide. It
Right.
might be something you're personally interested in. It might even be something you're doing something with behind the scenes, but you're sure as hell not going to hold a press conference. You're sure as hell not going to answer
Yeah.
questions about it. No comment, you move on. No, all of a
Yeah.
sudden, certain senators and Congress people are coming out and talking about this.
Hmm.
And reading between the lines, it sure looks like they're getting briefed on things that they can't talk about, but there's something there, right? It's not a nothing. They're not getting a briefing from the military that says, like, yeah, there's some stuff up there. We don't know what it is. It's probably not a big deal, right? You would
And
not see
because
this
they're
level of
like
action
acting.
from Congress.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
because
So
they're
they're
doing
acting in some.
things.
Okay.
Now, here's the first big thing that happens, and this was shocking. Uh, as part of the funding bill after the pandemic, right? That first big funding bill, they had to do both the NDAA, which is like the military funding budget every year, but also there was emergency coronavirus funding bills.
Right.
A provision was put in demanding a classified report from the DoD to Congress on the topic of UAPs, which, by the way, is kind of the new official word that they use. It's
For
unidentified
UFO.
aerial phenomena. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
UFO is unidentified flying object. They're now unidentified aerial phenomena.
Okay.
Phenomena is an interesting term because it opens the
Right.
idea that they're saying they're not necessarily all nuts and bolts crafts. But anyway,
Right.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically, they're embarrassed by the word UFO. It's
Oh,
associated
yeah,
with
of
little green
course.
men and giggling.
Yeah,
No, no, these are UAP, totally different.
of course.
Uh, so Congress demands a report from the DoD on everything they know about UAP by June 20, I forget the date, but
Yeah.
the report had to come out in, oh God, what year was it? 2021.
Okay.
So 2020, the funding bill passes, and basically they have a year to make this report, and they have to make a public version of the report. The
Mm,
UFO
hmm.
community goes off their rockers. This
I'm
is
sure. Yeah.
unheard of. This is crazy. All of a sudden, the government is doing something.
Right.
People are predicting everything from disclosure with a capital D
Hmm.
to this is going to be another cover up.
Yeah.
You can't
Swamp
expect
gas.
anything. The government. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the thing is, there's a good case for both of those.
Yeah. Right.
On June 25th, literally the last possible day they could do it, they released the classified version to Congress and an abbreviated unclassified version to the public. We have since found out a little bit about what was in the classified version. There were just some pages that weren't released to the public, and it was
Okay.
like common UFO shapes. Um, and there
Hmm.
was a whole discussion about why would you need to classify that, but it basically came down to announcing what type of shapes we're detecting could tip off our enemies to our detection capabilities. But more importantly, it tips them
Right.
off to these are things we think are UFOs. So suddenly, Russia goes off and develops a drone that looks like what we think is a UFO to trick us, right? So it's
Right.
an interesting thing that, like,
Yeah.
literally, what
Really true.
shapes we're seeing in the sky is classified information,
Yeah.
whereas the fact that we're seeing things in the sky is not.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that I find fascinating. So you, like me, grew up in the 80s. In the
Hmm.
60s, Project Blue Book was the Air Force's big public investigation into it. Blue Book identified everything. They would come out and investigate,
Oh,
and
yeah. Right.
all the I've mentioned swamp gas several times. I've
Right.
mentioned weather balloons. Like
Yeah.
these were the kinds of explanations that would come out. Some police officers would come out. These are credible witnesses, and they would say we were
Yeah.
chasing an object down the highway. It was maneuvering in ways we couldn't expect. It landed. It took off. And Blue Book would come in and say, "Oh, you saw Venus."
How
Like,
how do you
uh,
figure like a
okay,
reflection?
yeah,
Venus is pretty
exactly,
tiny
right?
in the sky. Like you
Yeah,
usually can't even see it. I don't know.
yeah. So most of the explanations were like that. They
Yeah.
were
Kind of
they
laughable.
were lazy, is the
Yeah.
word I think of. Like it didn't
Okay.
seem like they were trying very hard. It felt like, and we have since confirmed through Freedom of Information requests,
Yeah.
that they had a mandate to discredit UFO things.
Got it.
So I just want to be
Okay.
clear that the last time we had a government report on UFO sightings,
Yeah.
there was an aggressive, embarrassing effort to explain everything.
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe there were one or two that were like, yeah, we don't know what this is, but it's probably natural, probably
Yeah.
a comet.
Yeah.
Swamp gas was the most laughable one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the UAP task force report comes out in June, and it has UAP reports from 2004 onwards. 2004 being the year the Nimitz encounter happened.
Ah.
The
Okay.
conspiracy
Interesting.
theorists here are like, oh, the military is going to pretend like there were no such thing as UFOs until 2004. I don't know, guys. They came
Yeah.
out of
Right.
nowhere. We've never seen them before, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but regardless, they had a collection of 144 reports. These are almost all military, high
Okay.
quality witnesses, etc. Based on Blue Book, how many of those would you expect they explained away?
I mean, like almost all of them, right? Like,
Right. Yeah, I think we were all expecting that. They explained one.
huh.
One of the sightings was definitively identified as a deflated balloon.
Okay.
Every other sighting was left unexplained. And they had a bunch of categories in there of what these sightings could be that basically boiled down to it might be airborne debris, it might be natural phenomena like weird clouds, it might be foreign adversaries, like this is a secret plan
Sure.
the Russians are developing or the Chinese. It might be something secret that we're developing, or it might be other.
Okay.
And because they've ruled out natural phenomena and airborne debris, other is pretty clearly understood to mean we can't say aliens, but other.
Uh, all right. I
Yeah,
feels like
yeah.
it's more like the phenomena. Like we don't know. Uh,
Well,
I think
yeah,
that's
that
great.
that is what it is literally. But like the point is, they didn't rule that out, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was included as a possibility here.
right.
Um, and the report strongly implied, and several senators came out later and confirmed, they are saying this ain't Russian, this ain't Chinese, and it's
Okay,
not us.
interesting.
If it was natural phenomena, you assume they would have been able to identify it. If it was
Maybe.
airborne debris, you assume they would be able to identify it. So if it's not Russians, and it's not the Chinese, and it's not us, what is it?
Don't
Now,
know.
if you're a UFO person like me,
Yeah,
you get really excited because there's a really clear other answer here that
sure.
everybody's kind of trying not to say. But even if you don't say it, even if you're sticking to the kind of nuts and bolts, we don't want to talk about who's in there. The fact is, this report came out and said, yes, UFOs are real. There are objects in the sky that are interacting with our pilots. They are doing things that we
Yeah,
cannot explain. And the
yeah,
cannot explain part is really important because they spent a year investigating. And we know from the past that they have the ability to debunk things.
yeah,
The fact that they didn't come out and throw up their hands and give some garbage explanation for everything just to get everyone off their backs, which they could have easily done,
yeah.
feels very noteworthy. That feels
It,
like a line in the sand. There's a
yeah.
water change here, you know?
It feels like the right movement, at least. I'm much more comfortable
Yeah,
with an investigation that comes out with we don't know rather than
totally.
we definitely know. Because you and I know debugging
Yeah.
is crazy hard, and
Mhm.
sometimes you're just like,
Super hard.
I don't know, it stopped happening.
Yeah.
So like,
I don't know.
uh,
We rebooted the radar and they were still there. I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Like I don't
Yeah.
know. So okay, that's it. That's cool. That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
positive progress
So
at
here's the
least.
thing. I've been talking about how the last 5 years have been crazy. And,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
if this is true, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is, whew, it's a very exciting time. All right. So that was like step two, right? Step one was there was an actual government investigation.
yeah.
Step two was Congress asked for briefings and were
Sure.
apparently interested enough in what they were told in their classified briefings that they demanded a full report.
Hmm.
That report came out and had a public component and did not reject it, and specifically rejected the idea that this was secret Russian or Chinese or US technology. The next thing that happens is because, again, right, at any point, everyone could have just stopped talking about this, and you would kind of expect that based on how everyone
Yeah,
has
right.
done this in the past. Congress didn't let this go. They went
Yeah.
back, and in the NDAA for the next year, they included the provision that there be a permanent UFO office. So before they had demanded a task force be formed for the specific purpose of producing the report. The report was
Yeah.
done, that task force is dissolved. They said,
Yeah.
no, you need to keep it going and you need to issue one of these reports to us. You need to make a public report every year and you need
Hmm.
to do a semi annual classified report to Congress.
Interesting.
Again, we don't know.
Yeah.
But reading between the lines, if there was nothing here, it doesn't feel like Congress would be hammering them like this. People in Congress are convinced enough that there is something to this topic to come back and hold the DoD's feet over the fire and say,
Yeah.
no, you don't get to walk away from this. You have to come back and keep telling us what's changed. What have you found?
Right.
Um, so
Yeah. And
some more time passed. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not used to like Congress and or I'm not used to that branch of government being particularly bold. So
Right? And
like this
especially
is
on
interesting.
this topic. This
Yeah,
is a
right?
topic that historically is career damaging. You
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
go out there and draw attention to yourself. Any one of these Congress people could have walked away after the report and
Right.
kind of excused as, yeah, we got some interesting info in the briefings, but they came out with the report and it looks like it's kind of a nothing burger. So, we're
Yeah.
we're focusing on more important things like what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah, I would
Nobody would
still
have been
love to
surprised by
know.
that.
Yeah, I would love to know how much of the work is being done in those like um, Congress and in
Hmm.
those people's districts. Like, is
Yeah,
this purely motivated by finance or I don't know, but
it's a good question. Now, my
yeah.
understanding is the permanent UFO office that they founded has like two people working in it. Like we are not
Okay.
talking about a
All
big
right.
like, oh
All
yeah,
right.
like we set up a new like base in Nevada and the Nevada
Okay.
senator got a kickback. Like, and this kind of brings us to the next thing, which is as we approached the deadline for the first semi-annual classified report, newspaper articles started getting written that Congress people were leaking that they thought the DoD was dragging their feet. They were not
Hmm.
taking this seriously.
Okay.
So they started making some noise about it. And specifically, they called a public congressional hearing. This doesn't sound like a big deal, right? What does Congress do? They hold hearings. This is the first public hearing on the topic of UFOs in 50 years.
Oh,
Again, we were
okay.
talking about how this is kind of like career suicide. The
Yeah.
last time they did this was in the 50s after a weeks long UFO overflight of Washington, D.C., where again, no one knew what it was, but there are objects and they're flying over the goddamn White House. What's going
Huh.
on, military? They held the biggest press conference ever and were forced to go before Congress and testify about
Wow.
what it was. And they never really came up with an answer. It was like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
There were some things. We saw them on radar.
Yeah. Interesting.
uh,
Okay.
but for 50 years, no one has touched
Nothing.
this topic publicly.
Yeah.
And we talked before about, the culture around this UFO music, X-Files theme song and
Yeah.
giggling
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
little green men, right? No one would have blamed Congress people in the middle of election season for
Right.
not pushing this topic,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If
Letting it
there's any
quietly
people
die.
in this story exactly, who could have been excused
Yeah.
for kind of like backing away. This is the
Yeah.
point. They pushed, they got a public report. The report didn't really tell us what it was. Okay, we're gonna walk away. No, they didn't do that. They
Hmm.
came back and codified it. You have to do this. You have to keep
Yeah.
coming back. And when they thought they weren't taking it seriously, they called a
They
public
did it
hearing
again.
and
Interesting.
dragged two DoD officials up and forced them to testify in front of Congress. This hearing was fascinating, Chuck. Uh,
Yeah.
the UFO community largely writ this off as a nothing burger. But
Sure.
how it was handled was really, really interesting. It was two high level DoD officials. It was not the people running the UAP task force, which is
Sure.
interesting because they were still kind of establishing the office. Uh,
Yeah.
but there was all sorts of indications in this hearing that, yeah, the DoD was not thrilled
Ah.
about being pinned to the wall and forced to report on this.
Yeah.
The most common answer that we got from these DoD guys was, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Plausible
if you
deniability.
study, well, exactly, and not just plausible deniability, but if you study any of these kind of black budget programs, it's really, really common to
Yeah.
not brief the highest level people because they're the ones who are most likely to get called to
Yeah.
testify. So if
Right.
they
Yeah.
haven't been briefed, they can legally say, I don't know about that.
Sure.
But the questions the Congress people were asking were wild, dude.
Yeah.
You would have expected a lot of like, hey, we've got these videos. Like, is this happening? What's going on? Is this a secret US program? Do you possess crashed material, like material recovered from UFO
Yeah.
crashes? Have you read the Admiral Wilson document, which, believe me, we're going to get to in a future episode? It is
Okay.
buck wild, but the only thing you need to know about it is it attests to the existence of secret reverse engineering programs in the government studying
Oh,
crashed
interesting.
UFOs. Like Congress people were asking the kinds
Hmm.
of questions that UFO people would ask.
Interesting.
And okay, Congress is a big group. You expect
Yeah.
probably a handful of them are
One
UFO
of them's going to
buffs,
be a nerd. Yeah.
but not a lot of them. And
Yeah.
again, there is a social stigma against this. And
Yeah.
they were absolutely asking questions and they were not getting answers.
Yeah. Of course.
So we're coming up on the time when they have to release the second public report.
Okay, that's
But
exciting.
the other thing that's happening right now is the next year's NDAA.
Hmm.
Well, guess what? They've come in and added a bunch more things to the
Interesting.
restriction to the functioning of this office. So there's three main things that they're doing this year. And I want to be clear, the NDA has not yet passed. So currently what I'm
Sure, yeah.
describing to you are potential amendments. That said, these amendments are what created the office in the first place. They have passed
Yeah,
without comment in previous years. No one's
yeah,
really expecting them to get dropped.
yeah.
But there's always a
I mean, as
possibility.
long as they're small enough, nobody bothers, I'm sure.
Right. So one of them is there is a requirement that the UAP office investigate reports back to 1947. So remember I said they were only
Oh,
looking at reports back to
yeah,
2004?
yeah. Oh,
So first of
interesting.
all, this is saying, hey, you don't get to pretend this just started. But
Yeah.
1947 is a really interesting year, and we'll probably talk about it more in the future. But the main thing to know about 1947 is that is when Roswell happened.
Yeah.
Roswell,
Okay.
even non-UFO people have heard about. That was the
Yeah.
one where a flying saucer crashed on a farm in New Mexico. The Army Air Force, who were stationed at a base nearby, came out and retrieved debris. They held a press conference announcing they had recovered a crashed flying saucer.
Wow.
Like 6 hours later, they came out and said, "Whoops, not a flying saucer. It was a weather balloon." Oopsie daisy.
Silly me.
No one believed this then. No one believes this now. Like
Yeah.
the idea, and this wasn't just any group of Army Air Force. This was the bomber wing that dropped the atomic bombs in Japan. Like this was the Air Force group at the time, who,
Hmm.
if you would expect any group of the military to know how to identify crashed debris of maybe Soviet origin,
Yeah.
these would have been the guys. These are not the
Yeah.
guys who are like, oh, I saw some metal on the ground that's actually from a weather balloon, and I thought it was. These
Yeah.
aren't the guys who get excited,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
1947, very interesting year to say you have to go back at least to 1947 and investigate.
I'm surprised they
Um,
didn't go back further. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
But maybe they're working
absolutely.
on it for next year.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It raises the question of if your goal is to say, stop arbitrarily pretending it started in 2004, why would you say earlier? Now, there's a couple of things. One is the Air Force was founded in 47.
Okay. All right.
It didn't
That's a pretty
exist
good
before
reason.
then. Before then, it was the Army Air Force. The CIA was founded in 1947. So there's some potentially good reasons for like
Okay.
record keeping might only go back to 47.
Yeah.
But also Roswell and the UFO sightings from 47 are kind of widely regarded as the start of the modern UFO phenomenon. There's
Interesting.
plenty of evidence that goes back a lot further, but
Sure.
at that point you're definitely getting into ancient alien territory and like, oh, this
Okay.
painting of lights over Nuremberg is clearly a UFO incident.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it is. I don't know,
Maybe.
but we're definitely getting out of like nuts and bolts. We have radar track territory and into speculative territory. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
1947, really interesting date to randomly put into a
Yeah. Yeah.
requirement
Right.
for a DoD report. Uh, Second, uh, they added a restriction to exclude man-made objects.
Okay.
Now that is a really interesting restriction. Why would they need to put that in there? So there's two uh, things that people believe why this is in there. One is, first of all, non-man-made objects is a category, like, which was not. It was hinted at with the other category in the original
Right. Yeah.
UAP report, but it wasn't explicit. Nobody said anything about objects not made by man. For
Okay.
Congress to come out and explicitly say, in future reports, don't bother talking to us about the man-made stuff, strongly implies that they believe there is non-man-made stuff, right? If Congress believed this was a secret U.S. project or a secret Chinese project,
Right.
they wouldn't phrase it this way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So they're,
the
but they're
second
like cutting
is,
apart the other category.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
The second is if they believed that they were about to get another like whitewash attempt by the military. If they thought the military was going to come in and be like, oh, hey, having had another year to look into it, we have now identified the remaining 143 cases, and they're all drones. It's all
Yeah.
civilian drones. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here.
Right.
This is them explicitly saying, we don't want that. You have to make a report to us. Don't bother coming to us with explanations about man-made objects. If you identify something as man-made, it doesn't belong in the UAP report by definition.
Kind of makes sense.
So it doesn't mean anything for sure, but it's a really fascinating bit of language to put in there to explicitly call out, we want to hear about the not man-made stuff. And it is a step forward from Marco Rubio and Senator Gillibrand. Whenever they would publicly speak about this, they would kind of couch their enthusiasm for the topic in the same way Elizondo did. If these things are up there and they are harassing our Navy pilots, wouldn't we want to know what they are? If they're foreign adversaries, shouldn't we know? Well, now they're explicitly saying, exclude the idea that they're foreign adversaries. If you figure out these are Russian jets, they don't belong in this report. That's really interesting. Right.
Yeah, totally.
So the third thing, and this is the thing that I am most excited about.
Okay.
This is phrased a variety of ways, but basically there's whistleblower protection. Guys like Lou Elizondo want to testify in front of Congress. They know things. Yeah. They were there. They studied it. They have access to classified information. And it's not just Elizondo. There's a bunch of other dudes. Chris Mellon, who is head of one of the agencies, a bunch of other people like that. There are people who know things, who want to testify, and are not allowed to because of their security oaths and their NDAs. Mm-hmm. Congress is adding language to this specifically to allow people to testify to Congress without fear of reprisal due to NDAs and security oaths. And that is a big freaking deal.
Yeah. So, but this would this mean that the testification, testimony just wouldn't be recorded and released to the public because
That's a great question. Okay. Yeah, I don't know whether it would be classified, but just getting it in front of Congress is a big deal because, again, we were talking about Congress is trying to find out what these things are, and there is some sense that the military is stonewalling them. There's also some language in here specifically about if these programs have been moved to private industry, your security oaths don't apply. Because one of the big kind of conspiracy theories here is that all of this shit was long ago moved to a bunker at Lockheed Martin. And now if you're a government employee, you don't have access and you don't have to testify. But it also means that Congress has no way to find out about it. And since this is a big deal, Congress is saying, no, you still have to tell us. So anyway, it doesn't mean anything for sure. But adding whistleblower language means the possibility of Lou Elizondo and other people like him getting up and telling Congress what they know. Whether publicly or not, that's a big freaking deal. And that feels like a step towards capital D disclosure of, what I think a lot of people are expecting to find out. And what I have heard through the reports that I find most credible is there have been UFO crashes, and you should hear crashes in air quotes. There's some question around if these are advanced alien saucers, why would they crash? Maybe they weren't. Maybe they didn't crash. Maybe they were crashed. They were more like seeded. Like, hey, here's a gift.
Sure.
But the point is, if there have been crash retrievals, if you accept that, there's increasingly evidence that that might be the case. What would have happened to them? And the word on the street is this stuff is so secretive that it is difficult to research, right? The way normal scientists do research is if you hit a brick wall, you go out and you ask your scientist friends, hey, I'm studying this. Have you run into what would you do with this? You can't do that if you're in a blacker than black program. It's you and 4 other dudes. The word is they have had these things since the 50s, and they have made, depending on who you talk to, either astonishingly little progress reverse engineering it,
Sure.
or they've gotten some technology out of it. Like there's one book that was written that's like, oh, night vision goggles, lasers, microcircuits, all of these things came from crash retrievals, and we seeded them out to private industry.
Hmm.
But point is, everybody kind of believes that if there were crash retrievals, they have since been moved to private industry to keep them out of like the reach of government, who they kind of see as unreliable, right? New
Sure.
president every 4 to 8 years, who knows what they're going to believe? They might blow the lid off. And if you're a certain type of security minded individual who's maybe operating in a Cold War mentality, you can
Hmm.
see how you can kind of get to a perspective of the president is a security risk. What do
Oh
we
yeah.
need to do to keep this stuff actually secret?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so, yeah, the fact that Congress is saying we want whistleblowers, again, kind of plugs into this narrative we're hearing that there's
Yeah.
something to be whistleblown.
Some whistles to be blown.
Yeah,
Right.
there are some whistles to blow. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Um, we're well past time. Uh, like well past time looking at the recording. Um,
That's all right. Let's not
I'm
worry about
ex
it. Keep it casual, right?
yeah, I'm
So
excited
what's your take
to
on this, right?
well, like I want to look up the Nimitz encounter or like the
Yeah.
2017 report and like see if I can
Hmm.
find the Nimitz recording. And like you and I were just talking about how uh, like I have difficulty trusting news sources.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I'm like struggling with how to even find it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Yeah.
everything I'm seeing is like, oh my gosh, most like whatever UFOs, yeah,
Sure.
and it's like, ugh, God,
I
how
I
do I?
can send you a few links.
Okay,
But yeah, the New York Times article is good because they very much avoid that breathless thing.
okay,
They do not
cool,
jump to conclusions. It's nuts and bolts. We are reporting on the fact that this program existed, and we
right,
have these videos.
yeah,
And then later they report a bit more on the encounters with the Navy pilots, and it has a similar tone.
yeah,
Um,
cool,
but also, I encourage you to go read the UAP Task Force report, the public one,
okay,
because it strikes a really interesting tone. Like if you read it in its own without any historical context, it kind of feels like a nothing burger. They're not
okay,
admitting anything. All they're saying is some stuff happened that we can't explain.
sure,
But in the historical context of understanding what a
yeah,
historic shift it is for them to say
we don't
there's
know,
something up there, that's a big deal. So yeah,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, that is
we
interesting.
talked about this before, and I told you, like, Chuck, did you know that the U.S. military admitted that UFOs are real, and Congress says they're man-made? That is an interpretation of it, and I
Yeah,
will admit that is the breathless interpretation.
yeah, yeah. There you go.
But this gets back to the thing I was talking about, right? Like, if this is true, it's a
Woo.
very exciting time. So the reason why I wanted to start a UFO podcast is because I feel like we are on an accelerating path here, right?
Yeah,
Since 2017, this topic has not slowed down. It is
yeah,
going at a breakneck pace, at least compared to 50 years of nothing, which is what we had before this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, do I think that the US government is going to come out tomorrow and admit, hey, we signed a treaty in 1947 with Grays from Zeta? No, I don't. But it feels like the current status quo of everyone kind of believes the military knows more than they're telling,
Hmm.
and no one knows what it is, which leads to rife speculation. I feel like that's changing. I feel like we are getting to a point where um, maybe the answer is the military doesn't know any more than we do. Yeah, we see
Right.
things up there. We have no idea who they are. You can understand why the military might be hesitant to admit there are things in the sky that we cannot
Yeah,
compete with and don't know how to defend us from.
yeah.
We'll talk about their interest in nuclear facilities later, but there's a lot of evidence that they are all over our nuclear facilities. It doesn't
Interesting.
look great if you're in charge of safeguarding the nuclear arsenal to admit, yeah, this giant UFO hovered over our gate and it disabled all of our nukes for 20 minutes. We don't know how they did it, and we could do nothing about
Wow.
it.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
not something you want to admit to the public. That doesn't
Hmm.
inspire confidence. So the kind of word that you always heard is the public can't handle the truth.
Hmm.
But nobody tells you what the truth is. And as a result, the
Right.
UFO community goes all the way from the truth is they don't know and are embarrassed, all the way up to there is a secret government treaty that allows the aliens to abduct a certain number of humans every year, and there's a secret breeding program going on. I don't know what the truth is. I'm leaning closer to the government doesn't know, but there's something there.
Right.
But the fact that we went from there's nothing to see here to there's something here opens all sorts of possibilities. Because
Yeah.
if there are UFOs and they're not man made, well, shit, man, what else
Let's
is real?
talk. Yeah, let's
Right?
get in
Like,
there.
are
Yeah.
abductions real? Are like all this other stuff. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean when I say it's a very exciting time. I
Yeah.
don't mean, Chuck, the aliens are going to be here tomorrow. I
Yeah.
mean,
I get it.
getting this one question changed from a no to a maybe opens so
Yeah.
many doors to
Yeah.
possibility. Like it is no
It's
exaggeration
wild.
to say it has shaken my worldview. This went from
Okay.
something that I was kind of interested in and lumped under the same category as like Bigfoot and Mothman to,
Right.
oh shit, like this is a real thing. I don't know
Huh.
what it means. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is, but there's something there. And how are we not all talking about this all the time? This is
Yeah.
this is wild.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm at all the time. I'm like, there are UFOs.
Why are you not
Oh,
talking about this? Like,
exactly, exactly. So I kind of appreciate that you're my ground wire, right? That
hmm.
you're kind of like, well, actually, Scott, my dad worked in the Air Force, and this
Yeah.
kind of thing is common. It doesn't mean what you think it means. That's
Yeah.
great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But this is definitely where I'm coming from, man. Like, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah. Oh man, that I absolutely agree with the idea that the public can't handle the truth, but I also think that in a lot of ways the military can't really handle science. Um,
Yeah,
and
totally.
so there's, I don't know. How do you deal with that? That's really complicated. Um, and
Yeah,
I do believe that the universe is way more complicated than we think. And
100%.
so
Yeah.
I'm excited to
Well,
see
and
that.
and what's going to happen when scientists start talking about this? Because
Right?
we talked about this briefly last time, right? Like Fermi paradox is
Mm,
kind of the extent of where you get scientists talking about it. And we went from in the 70s, there's no life anywhere, to in the 90s, okay, it is likely that there's some life
it's got to be
somewhere,
there. Yeah.
to now the scientific consensus is the universe is likely teeming with life, but we are separated by such vast different distances that we'll never be able to communicate. Well, we're on a trajectory there. And
Yeah.
the whole problem with the universe is teeming with life, but the distances are too large, is it's based in our understanding
Yeah.
of
Right.
technology and physical laws. Like, it
Right.
presumes that nobody else is smarter than us or has
Yeah.
uncovered how
Right.
to travel faster than light. And
Categorically
I don't know if I
untrue.
accept that. Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
Yeah. God, if there's no one smarter than us,
lots of
we're all
stuff out there.
doomed.
All right. All right. Well, like you said, we are over time, so we should hit the stop button. But I will just tease. Next time,
Okay.
we are going to talk about how the the backstory to how Lou Elizondo came out and all of this happened all boils down to the lead singer from Blink 182. It is a wild story, dude. It is so strange.
Oh my gosh. All right. That sounds great. I'm excited.
Excellent, dude. I'm so
Yeah.
happy you're doing this with me. This is
Yeah,
great.
me too. Yeah, this is really fun. I enjoy it.